What do you do when a child struggles to follow instructions, join conversations, or keep up in class? Not because they're not trying, but because their brain can't quite make sense of what it hears. What's really going on beneath the surface of auditory processing difficulties, and how can we help? Hello, and welcome to the Sensational Life with Bibic. I'm Abby.
And I'm Natalie.
And we are developmental therapists at Bibic.
Each week we're going to dive into the many layers of life with honesty, heart, and a little bit of humour, because let's face it, navigating the world with additional needs can be tough, but it also can be empowering, inspiring, and yes, a little bit sensational.
Bibic is a national charity that supports many individuals with neurological or developmental challenges, and this podcast is our way of bringing support, tips and real stories straight to you.
This season we're talking all things education, from navigating the classroom with confidence, discovering learning strategies, we're unpacking it all with some great guests too. So whether you're a parent, a teacher, or someone that just wants to better understand how to support the SEND community, you're in the right place.
So grab a cuppa, get comfy, and let's make the world a little more inclusive, one episode at a time. Welcome back to another episode of The Sensational Life with Bibic. Today we have the lovely Caris with us.
Hello.
She's one of our lovely developmental therapists here, and we're going to be talking all things auditory processing.
I feel like it's going to be one of those topics that not a lot of people touch on, but hopefully we're going to dive deep into how it affects everyone, affects children in school specifically, because obviously we're all education this season. So yeah, let's get started. So basically, what is auditory processing and how is it sort of different from probably hearing loss or sort of things like that?
That's a good question. So I feel like this is like the first thing that everyone always thinks about when you talk about if someone's mishearing things or like needs to take a little bit of time to take in what someone says, is you kind of go back to hearing and is there a hearing issue? But I feel like the difference is more between physical and what's kind of going on mentally in terms of that processing side of things. So when we're talking about hearing, we're talking about the kind of biological processes, how our ear works, how our ear takes in different sounds and the vibrations, pass it all along and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas auditory processing is more how that information gets travelled all the way up to the brain and how it's made sense of. So it's completely separate to hearing, and a lot of people with auditory processing difficulties have absolutely like perfect hearing, and it's one of the first things that gets checked. Really, it's like checking your hearing. Hearing's fine. It could relate more to auditory processing.
And I always liked the example when I first started learning about auditory processing about sort of the difference in sounds. So they always use the one bed, isn't it? It's like ba, da. And actually when we're learning those sounds, it's how we state those sounds slightly different. So it's like the ba and then the and then the da. And actually what's happening in those moments is the brain just noticing those sounds in different sort of order, basically.
Yeah. So when you talk about auditory processing, it's you're hearing sound, but your brain has to work out what's the volume of the sound, what's the pitch, like frequency of the sound, and like where is that sound. So your auditory processing is all of these little processes and like functions going on. So if you've got issues with that, then there might be some frequencies that you're processing faster or slower or louder or quieter. So like with words like bed, it might be that the way it lands in the language centre and the way it's processed is in a completely different order, and you hear like ebed or something like that. Something that's like slightly different, so you mishear it or you miss parts and there's gaps in it. So it's just a bunch of different processes, and something's going on with the challenge or something like that.
And I suppose that would then also be related, like we see it a lot, I think, at Bibic, where with instructions, when you're giving long, complex instructions, and when we see difficulties with auditory processing, the individual's hearing parts of the instruction or hearing it in a jumbled order, and it just takes that much longer to try and unpick it and find out.
And I think sometimes it causes that anxiety, isn't it? Because it's sort of like if they're not hearing, well, it's not if they're not hearing the instruction, if they're not processing the instruction. And I think we try to help people out, don't we? So I might ask you guys, will you go in the kitchen and get me a sandwich or something like that? And then you feel like they haven't heard you, so you reword it to try and aid in understanding, because they've not understand what you've asked for. But in rewording it, you've then added additional information. So not only did they not process the first part of it, we haven't then processed the second part of it, and then you try again because we're three strikes, we love a good friend. And then you try again, and it just then gets into that sense of sort of overwhelm because it's now 3 different instructions where I just wanted a sandwich out there, right?
I think it's a very natural thing to do. Like, I've had conversations with parents where, you know, previously people have said, oh, if they don't understand one thing, phrase it in another way. And yeah, absolutely, that will work in that typical sense. But with auditory processing, that's, like you said, going to add that extra strain onto what they're trying to do and trying to work out.
I've heard a really good analogy of that as well, when if you're struggling to like process auditory information and someone says something to you, it's like you're rolling someone a ball and you're waiting to catch it. So if they're processing it, you're waiting for them to catch the ball. So you don't want to start throwing like loads more balls at them because they're going to get overwhelmed, they won't catch any of them. Whereas if you give them time and then re-roll the same ball, they've got a lot more chance of catching it. So the same way as giving them time to process and then using the same language.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I really like that.
Stolen.
Analogy queen.
We've got plenty. I was going to go, I've got another analogy, but I'll wait till later. So in terms of sort of auditory processing difficulties, I know first, before we sort of go into how it affects someone in the classroom, I feel like potentially we need to identify what's the difference between auditory processing disorder and auditory processing difficulties, because obviously at BIBIC, we aren't able to diagnose, so we don't ever use the term disorder. We always use difficulties, but there is very much a difference between the two as well. Do you want to touch on that a little bit, Karis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing with auditory processing disorder is it's not something that's kind of continuously looked at across the country, at least in the UK. It's not something that is diagnosed everywhere. And because there's so much overlap with auditory processing challenges and other comorbidities, at BIBIC we tend to look at it more as auditory processing difficulties rather than focusing specifically on disorder. So it encompasses a much larger group of people because not everyone will necessarily have access to a diagnosis of auditory processing disorder, but there are a lot of people who have those challenges in itself.
And I think as well, in terms of sort of neurodiversities as a whole, in terms of sort of whether it's ADHD, autism, dyslexia, there tends to be sort of attached to that, you'll probably find that someone with dyslexia would have auditory processing difficulties, and same with ADHD, etc. like that. But they may be coming from different areas. Potentially with the ADHD, it's from an attention focus aspect. From dyslexia, it's probably a comprehension understanding aspect. So again, do you think that sort of difficulties probably outline more of sort of a roundabout where it comes from everyone, whereas a disorder, I think it's like a specific learning difficulty, isn't it? On its own?
I think so. I think it's just a lot more inclusive of a lot of different people with different challenges. And
I mean, I would say auditory processing difficulties is actually something I struggle with now. Like, as a teacher, I used to be able to have a class full of 30 children. One would say something to me from across the classroom whilst I was working with a group, and I'd understand what they'd say. I'd hear someone else go, I need the toilet, and the teacher would come in and tell me that, and I could process it all. And it's almost as if I've lost that skill since leaving the classroom. Because if I'm in the office and it's really busy and people are having a conversation, and then like, Nat, you called to me across the room, I've got no hope of hearing what you say.
I don't know what you're on about. I don't call to you across the room. I get up and walk over to you and have a conversation.
professional manner.
In a professional manner. Mind you, Karis and I, we were just on Teams, weren't we?
It's just like, why are we doing this?
We're like
sat next to each other.
2 desks away, and we're like, it's just much easier to type.
I know, I always feel weird when I reply to Karis in an email and I think I could just get up and go have a conversation.
Because we're chatting through like email, Teams, probably something else as well, and input like every single source of communication.
We're just aiding each other's auditory processing.
Okay, all the accommodations.
If you were having all those conversations at once, it would just be a nightmare trying to process all of that.
We're just being proactive.
It's interesting though when you said like you feel like it's developed, because I feel like I wasn't, because I feel like I've got auditory processing difficulties as well, but I didn't realise how bad it was until COVID, until everyone was wearing masks.
Yeah.
Because when you struggle with your auditory processing, you tend to rely on other like prompts to help your brain work out what people are saying. So during COVID, I was working at school at this point. Everyone obviously popped their masks on, and I never knew what anyone was saying ever. So someone would like knock on the door and be like, I no, there's no chance, no chance at all, because that extra prompt of like lip reading and working out what those sounds are meaning and how they're being processed was just ripped away. It was gone. And I know that a lot of people we've seen say very similar things. Yeah. So it's interesting the things you rely on without realizing, because I never knew that. Yeah,
and when you've got when you've got an individual, when you've got an individual with that self-awareness of someone speaking to me and I need to respond, I think you'd get those heightened levels of anxiety of I need to give that response, but I've literally no idea what you're saying. And like, if you know that that's a difficulty with you, then going forward, like just in every day-to-day situation, like just the amount of stress that will cause an individual is phenomenal, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's only so many times that you can say pardon.
Yeah, and you have to just nod.
Yeah,
and smile and hope that it's the right answer.
What if I just agreed to? I'm not quite sure.
It's either that or completely mishear it. Like in my family, I'm so like well known for this, where someone will be like, "How was your day?" And I'll be like, "Who am I going to slay?" Like, what do you, like I have completely like misheard what they've said and just filled in the gaps incorrectly. You know?
And I think that's actually a really good follow on, because the next thing that sort of potentially is worth talking about is actually how does this affect a child's learning, because we're all talking education, and actually that's a big thing. And I think not only in education but also with parents and their communication with their child, where the child's like, "You said this," and you're like, no, I definitely didn't. I know I didn't. Or you said it in this tone, like, or you're shouting at me, like, I'm really not raising my voice at you. And I think I often hear that a lot in assessment, where it's sort of that and again, I'm using the term misunderstand, but because they haven't processed the sound or processed the volume or processed what's being said, you get that misunderstanding, because they're like, "Oh, you told me I could go on there for 15 minutes. You're like, "I don't think I did." But then it starts this whole sort of, you get this back and forth and sort of frustration and stuff like that. So that's something I quite commonly hear. How can auditory processing difficulties then have an effect on an individual's learning?
I think it actually goes like way deeper than just like taking in verbal information. So obviously you think that's like the most obvious thing is when that child's been given instructions and they've got to follow those instructions, keep them in their head, that kind of thing. Obviously they'll struggle more with that, especially if they're more complex or anything like that. But I suppose it goes even deeper into like spelling and like reading and that kind of thing, and developing language and phonics and telling the difference between sounds and having that discrimination between sounds will be a real big challenge and affect how well someone can spell and how they learn to blend words when they're reading and all of those kind of areas too, as well as if like new topics are coming up in the classroom and unfamiliar language is being used, it's going to have so much more like strain on their auditory processing and make it a lot harder and quite like scary and like anxious, because there's a lot of new words, we don't understand them, and we need that extra time with it.
I think as well, like something that I've noticed, especially if you think when going back to that bed analogy, was it an analogy?
That's fine, I know what you mean.
I think what I've noticed going back to sort of the bed example is, especially if we're utilising phonics in class, that's a lot of the time what we do in spellings. And then if you're not hearing the sound in the order that potentially the sound is being given to you, then you're looking at that on a piece of paper and that's not matching what the sound is saying. It's going to add all that extra confusion in, because now what you're looking in front of you isn't matching what you're hearing. And actually then that has an impact on our ability to read and sort of understand the information we're reading, because again, if you're not processing everything that's being read to you, you're not going to have a good understanding of what the person's reading about, then you're not going to be able to do that into your reading as well. So I feel like auditory processing is just such a deep
it's got so many layers, and it goes into so many other things. Because even now I've just thought, what about when the classroom's noisy and you've just got to do work, or you've got to
try and concentrate on it.
Absolutely, because you don't have that auditory figure ground to block out that information and take in what's important, which is what the teacher's saying, or focusing on your work. So you've got all these like information coming in and multiple channels of attention. It's just so hard to focus, and there's just so many different areas that it
like impacts. Even when the teachers working in groups and like the kids are concentrating on what they're doing, if you've got a teacher working with a group and a TA working with a group and a one-to-one working with someone else, it's still going to be low level noise that individuals with auditory processing difficulties are going to be taking in at the same time as trying to concentrate on what they're trying to do.
And adding in the whammy of sensory processing. So if you're if you're particularly sensitive to sound, so again you're in that environment, you're particularly picking up on someone rustling some paper or doing something else, whilst you're also then trying to listen to what's being said and process to what's being said. And I think that's why it's so multi-layered, because again, and why we use the term difficulties, because it's not like, where's it coming from? Like, what exactly is causing those difficulties? Because again, sensory, I feel, could have quite a major impact on the ability to understand what someone's saying, because you're so aware of what's going on in the classroom.
And then that can look exactly like ADHD, and that's where this like confusion comes in, where there's so much overlap that auditory processing can literally look exactly the same, but they're also really comorbid as well. So sometimes you're going to have someone with both or just with one, and then it's just this whole confusing thing of just coming from so many different areas.
That's such an important thing to say, I think, because I think that's something we often have a conversation about in our therapy meet. This is going to be a thing to edit.
Do you know though, auditory processing or word finding, another thing that is so great example.
I think that's a really important thing to say, actually, because we often talk a lot about that in our therapy meetings, especially if we got an individual that we believe to have auditory processing difficulties and or ADHD, because we try and work out, actually, is the distractibility, the attention coming from an auditory processing perspective or an ADHD perspective? Because you think if you're in a classroom and you're hearing everything and you're misunderstanding things, you're going to be making impulsive moves, you're going to be copying those around you, you're going to end up being a little bit more silly, because let's avoid actually trying to understand and take in what's being said. So where really is that coming from? We often have quite
I think that's the beauty of that holistic assessment that we do, is if you took it as, let's have a look at ADHD, and nothing else, it would come up looking potentially like ADHD, but looking into sensory and auditory processing, you can unpick that a little bit more and go, actually, that's where those inattention qualities are coming from.
Definitely. So on the note of sort of auditory processing, what are some simple things that, because I always feel, again, with things like this, you really need to go like, what's the simple things that we can just first put in place that's going to actually have a big impact before we go down the route of like even more detailed sort of strategies? Do you guys have any sort of recommendations, like things that can help individuals with sort of auditory just don't do a podcast. Do you have any strategies that, I don't know how we're going to edit that out?
But no, do you know what, again, it's a beautiful example.
Please, no,
beautiful example, because you just mentioned about like how with like the podcast, editing the podcast, that kind of thing. Actually, on the topic of a podcast, think about auditory processing, how someone would listen to this and process this, and how actually if they're just relying on that auditory information, they might struggle with something like just a podcast, and instead maybe having like a simple transcript or subtitles and something like that is a great example of how to support with that as well.
My notes that I can't even read.
So that's something I use all the time though. Like if I'm watching telly, I have to have subtitles on, because
you know I do now.
Yeah, it's so much easier, isn't it? You know what's happening.
I'm not even. I've got dyslexia. I'm not even reading this. I still read them. Yeah, it's just like
it's an extra cue. It's an extra little thing. And I saw a video the other day. It was like someone doing an example of like if you have auditory processing difficulties, of like even without subtitles, when you're looking at the screen, like it all makes sense. You're processing it, and maybe you just like go and grab a drink, and whilst you look away, it's like they're talking like and until you look back at the screen, like you can't take it in, which is why having those visual prompts like words or being able to see somebody's mouth can support very, very simply in just like in the classroom, having a teacher facing you when they're talking to you rather than facing the board. Those tiny little things are going to make such a huge difference when it comes to
thinking about like where to place them in the classroom as well, like the seating plan. If you're at the back of the classroom, you've got a lot of noise in front of you and a lot of people before you can process that.
And it's a new thing at the moment, isn't it? And I think they're becoming really popular. Those sort of in-ear earplugs that help you, what are they called? Those
Like loops or
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like they're becoming really popular because they have the ability to get rid of the background noise and still have that ability to remain focused on the person in front of you.
Yeah.
And I know I think Claire uses them in the office sometimes, and she says it's so helpful. Because it can't be helped. You think we're all typing away, clicking away, that sort
It's
of
just
thing.
that din in the background. It can take that away so that you can focus on what you need to be doing.
And I feel as well like there's a lot of stuff that we can do at home to support individuals when they go into school, because especially with auditory processing, it's all around the pathway. So it's all around like how the pathways in the brain have formed in terms of the most effective or not so effective. Because again, going even deeper, it's connected to your laterality, it's connected to your left ear, right ear. So we look at it, especially in assessment. So we've got different ways to look at auditory processing. We either do a dichotics or we do a TAPS. Now, a dichotics we tend to get a lot of information from because we really pull out exactly how they listen to it, what they're doing when they're listening. Are they tilting their head? Are they sort of shutting their eyes? That sort of thing to focus. And then a TAPS goes a lot more in depth, so it's looking at sort of verbal instructions, clusters of sort of information, short bits, long bits, background bits, that sort of thing. But we often use the dichotics as our most popular version. And what this does is it's looking at whether you are dominant in your right ear or left ear or mix. So I always go into this, but I feel like one of you two are going to do better justice today because I obviously can't talk. But it's all around that sort of left ear, right ear and mix, and that's what we a lot of the time focus on.
Yeah, so I mean, with auditory processing, ideally, you want to have your right ear to be dominant because your language centre is on the left-hand side of the brain and your left-hand side of the brain controls the right-hand side and vice versa. If you have a left ear dominant, it's fine. The information will go across to the right-hand side of the brain and then go over to the language centre on the left-hand side. It's an effective pathway, but it is obviously slower than just going from right straight across to left. When you don't have an ear dominance, information is going to go into both ears and kind of ping around like the pinball machine.
Yeah.
Get all mixed up before it gets to the language centre. So some information is going to travel quickly, other information is going to travel slow, and that's where you're going to get bits of information that's lost, things that are jumbled, and having to unpick that is really quite tiring. I remember when I started at Vivic and you gave me this.
The dog analogy. That's what I was going to
feel.
Yeah. That was what I was going to bring in when Karis was talking her analogies.
I'll let you say your analogy, but I've always remembered it. I just think it's a really good analogy and I use it when I'm trying to explain it to parents.
Yeah, because I like it because I feel like it really gives an example of that tiredness that it's going to sort of have. So here's the analogy. You've got a field, it's long grass, and you've got two gates, one at the start of the field and one at the end of the field. Now, if you walk through that field, you go into the first gate, you let your dog off, what does it do? It goes back and forth, round and round, and it creates a pathway that's kind of weaving along that field. So all that grass that was initially fresh and new and standing up is now kind of flat, and it's created this path back and forth. Now, when you meet your dog at the gate at the end, it's panting, it's tired, it's sort of eyes bright, it's like, I don't know what I've just done sort of thing. Now, if you then go back to the gate, say it's the next day, and you actually walk across that field with your dog in a straight diagonal from the first gate to the second gate, with the dog on the lead, you get to that gate and the dog's not tired. So it's kind of showing actually, by doing that long pathway, by the time you get to the point where you need the information, the brain's quite fatigued. It's probably going to have to do that another 7, 8, 9 times. And actually, it's going to be very, very tired when it gets to the other end. And the reason I use that analogy is because it goes into Johansson, so our Johansson auditory stimulation program that we often recommend. And I think you're now our lead on that, Abby. So do you want to sort of drop in sort of why we recommend Johansson to families.
Johansson auditory stimulation is listening to some set pieces of music with different frequencies embedded within it to help enhance how we process those sounds. So when you're saying that the dog is running and going all over the place, it's not having that nice direct path. By listening to these set pieces of music, it enhances those pathways.
Putting the dog on the lead, isn't it?
Yeah, putting the dog on the lead and walking it across the field.
I always feel like it sounds quite barbaric, but actually you think in terms of brain plasticity, when you're younger, your brain is so much more malleable, is that the right word?
Yeah.
That actually doing something like Johansson has such an impact because it's training the brain and the pathways. It's quite a long program though, isn't it?
It is. It's only 10 minutes a day though.
No, that is very true.
It's not long, and we often recommend doing it at with your bedtime routine. For the younger ones, if they were to take part in this program, you can even do it whilst you're asleep.
Yeah.
Like just having the headphones on.
So keep an eye out on our socials because we are going to be posting a little bit more about it in the coming weeks. Or we've probably already posted. I'm so confused of when we're recording this and when we're posting this. But we probably have already posted quite a bit about it. But if you do
check social media.
If you do have any queries, do just email us. So the email address is literally jis@bibic.org.uk. And all three of us do it, don't we?
We do.
Do the programme. And I feel like we see loads of great things from it. I know at the moment I'm working and they'll be on their wind down actually with a family where the child and the mum have done Johansson. And it's so lovely because they're both seeing such an impact, not only in terms of the processing of sort of auditory information, but also in confidence and sort of being able to sort of participate in conversations and regulate their emotions. Like it really just shows the impact of what auditory processing has on a person, because actually they feel more confident, they're managing their emotions and they're regulating better. And again, that's just through auditory processing.
It can help with general processing as well, can't it? So one of the things that we look at here is processing. And one of the success stories that we've had here is there's been someone on the 2nd percentile for general processing.
Yes.
And then by completing the Johansson program, they were then on the 25th percentile.
That's
so that
huge
is
difference.
just
We love
insane.
stuff like this, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, I remember we were having a conversation in the office the other day about one of our sponsor children that we've all been working with, and we were all like, oh my god, I can't believe
it was amazing.
Yeah.
She was phenomenal, bless her.
So, in terms of sort of going back to school,
Sorry, we went off topic, didn't we? Entirely. Right. Education and schools.
Especially, we're at 30 minutes. I know we have had some little blips, but like you said at the beginning, before we started this, you were like, we could talk for hours.
Yeah, honestly. There's so much more we still haven't spoken about.
So in terms of sort of strategies and tips, because we always want to do this, don't we? This is like the biggest thing in our podcast. We want to make sure that we're giving those recommendations, strategies, because simple things that you can just go away and do. And I think we attempted to start it earlier and then we went off on the tangent. So in terms of things that can just be popped in the classroom, what have you guys got?
So like we spoke about earlier, rather than just relying on the child or the young person to just take in verbal information, it's backing it up in some kind of way. So if you can do visual demonstrations so the child can watch what you're doing rather than just having to listen to instructions, or even just like writing it on the board as well, it just gives them an extra bit of information to take in that doesn't solely rely on just processing that verbal information.
There was one thing that I often recommend to sort of more secondary school side of things as well, like if they're using PowerPoints and things like that, just printing out the PowerPoint so it's in front of them. So again, if they're sort of looked away and the next slide's gone on, they can just quickly refer and go, oh, that was on the slide before, or write notes and things like that, because that can be really supportive too.
Or even for like older individuals, like transcription apps.
Yeah.
So like, say you're in a lecture or something, like I relied on this so heavily when I was in uni, but like having an actual app that transcribes, it's like real life subtitles. It's amazing. So you can see, well, someone's saying something, but you can also take in what's being said at the same time.
Is that Otter AI?
Otter AI
Yeah.
does it, yeah. There's quite a few out there, but that's really
not the
good
only one available.
Yeah.
But
So that's, yeah, they're really helpful for if you can have that in the classroom, like especially if there isn't like a PowerPoint, if you go to like a guest speaker or something like that, like it's so useful to just chuck on and it just does a great job.
And I think with the younger ones as well, being really clear and precise with your instructions. So I think as adults, and I'm tarring everyone with the same brush, so I do apologise, but we like to explain why things need to happen. So like in the classroom, if you need a child to go and get their PE kit on or go and get their coat on, whatever it is, it's you need to go and do this because and then this when actually that's a lot for a child with auditory processing difficulties to try and process in a very short time restraint. So being really clear and precise and only giving them the information that they need. So and so, go get your coat on. If you need to repeat it, use exactly the same language like we said earlier. Or if they're really not getting it, reduce it. So you're still using the same information, but you're shortening the instructions. So you've started with so and so, go and get your coat. If you need to reduce it, so and so, coat.
Yeah.
And it's the same information. You're not adding extra information for them to process. You're just supporting them with that.
And I think also that can be really supportive because, again, I get asked a lot of how do I know they're just not processing what I've said, or they're just being slightly defiant, or they're just pushing back, or they're sort of testing boundaries. And I always say using that style of sort of communication, you can really ascertain, because another thing that you can bring in for the older ones is saying the instruction like simply and precise, repeating the instruction exactly the same, and then if you feel like you just want to clarify they've actually heard you, asking them what you've asked them to do. So what was it I needed you to do, or what are you going to do? If they repeat back what you've asked them to do and therefore they're not doing it, you can kind of work out, okay, they're kind of not listening to me, are they pushing boundaries, etc. like that. If they go, I don't know what you said or have no idea, you have the opportunity to then repeat it exactly the same and sort of just clarify their understanding. So it can be quite a good one to work out what actually is happening as well.
Make sure you say their name first as well, so that they're actually clued into, because if they're taking in all of that auditory information in the classroom and they're really struggling to, like with sound sensitivities and things like that, they're not necessarily going to tune into something you're asking them unless you've said their name. I find that quite a lot. I need my name to be said.
Abby. Something that I thought is probably worth touching on, and I feel like we'll probably do it quite a lot through this series, is how do parents bring up these conversations with school? Because I know a big thing with schools and parents is that communication, making sure that parents have an understanding of how their child is in school and how school have an understanding of how the child is at home. And we often find there's the masking elements, the difficulties that are seen at home and not in school and stuff like that. And I think the real important thing is just making sure that you have those conversations and actually being really sure that you're starting with like an observation, like I've noticed my child often what needs things repeated, or I've noticed that it's specifically when it's in a noisy place, and then asking the teacher if they've noticed similar things, or could they keep an eye out and have an awareness if this is happening in the classroom. And I always think as well, following things up in an email, because at the end of the day, teach, like you said, Happy, you've got 30 kids plus another teacher coming and having a conversation with you. And many schools and most schools will do the best they can within the realms of what they've got. So actually, if you can follow that with an email, or if you can actually start the conversation in an email, something like that, and just be aware that there are 30 other kids and 30 other parents that are probably doing very similar, and then go down the routes of on a conversation potentially with a Senko involved and things like that if you still see these difficulties progressing. But it's just making sure you really highlight exactly what you've noticed, because I think again, for parents, that can be...
Yeah, it's not going in with that label initially. So if you do notice any of these difficulties that we've spoken about today, it's not going into school and going, I think they've got auditory processing difficulties. Like Nat said, it's observation. So you might have noticed that they are struggling to take in the instructions, or they're being quite inattentive, and comparing notes, as it were, to see if it's the same.
And I think we noticed in assessments as well, like, at the end of the day, parents know their children. Like, they spend 365 days, 24 hours a day with their child. They do notice things. I think this is the difficulty as well. It's sort of like how we then communicate that. And that's what we find in assessments as well, isn't it? We try and work out where these things are coming from that the parent has noticed. So it can be quite good just to give those observational stuff.
And things with masking as well. Some individuals are really adept at masking. And if you are bringing this conversation to the educational environment, they might then be able to pick up on things that they weren't previously noticing because of the masking.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's all collaborative. Both parties are trying to do the best by...
Yeah, exactly. And I think raising it is like, and having those discussions is so important, because so many strategies that support auditory processing like don't require extra funding. They are very simple little accommodations that benefit like the whole class, like just by sometimes speaking a bit more clearly and writing things on the board and that kind of thing. So just opening up that conversation with them so they know that my child's struggling because I've seen this, this and this. Yeah, they just need little strategies that can be easily put in and benefits everybody. So,
and I think also like at home as well, like you can play games, like there's listening games that you can do. I know sort of Chelsea's recommended to families, and she has a wonderful story about the Go game where she was playing it with a child, and you have to basically, they want to ask a request, and I think the child came and asked her if she could do some drawing. She said yes, of course, but you just got to wait until you hear go. And then the child went off, and Chelsea had said go a couple of times or something like that. And the child came back and went, "Are you ever going to say go?" So it's sort of like playing games like that, of like attention games and word games and having words of the days and stuff like that, where actually can be quite impactful too, because like we said, brain plasticity, pathways, we can have that impact on them. Oh, I think...
Yeah, that's a lot of information I think we've given today. I think that's a good place to end. And look out on our social media, because we're going to do a little sum up of our podcast as well, like key bits of information as we go. So if you need some help with that auditory processing, hopefully that little social media post will just give you those highlights from today. But thank you so much, Caris, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We've loved having you in to chat.
Yeah, thank you, Caris. Appreciate it. At least everyone hasn't had to just listen to me and Abby.
They love it. Thanks for tuning in to The Sensational Life with Bibic. We hope you're leaving with new insights, fresh ideas, and a bit more inspiration than when you press play.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe. And if you have a moment, leave us a review. It really helps us reach more listeners and grow this amazing community.
If you've got a question, a story to share, or a topic you'd love us to cover, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at thesensationallife@bibic.org.uk.
And don't forget to come over and say hello on social media. Follow Bibic to stay up to date with episodes, extras, and maybe some behind the scenes bits.
Until next time, keep it sensational.